Masechet Gittin Daf Chet. Three major topics today. The first one is regarding the borders of Israel into the sea. How far does the territory of Israel extend into the Mediterranean Sea? Second topic is the borders of Israel in the north. Is Syria considered part of Israel or not for various halachot? And the third topic, we're going to start talking about a slave who brings an emancipation document with him from somewhere else, and he says a similar formula to that of the Get Nashim, and so we'll see how those laws apply to the emancipation of a slave. So we started the first topic regarding a boat yesterday when we saw two contradictory baraitot. If someone writes a get on a ship and then brings it from the ship onto the land of Israel, so the first baraita says being written on the ship is the same as being written in Israel. You don't have to say the formula. The second one says no, the ship is like it's outside the land of Israel. And we tried to relate this to a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, where Rabbanan say that soil that is on a boat is liable to Ma'aser and Shevit. In other words, the boat is considered part of the land of Israel, as long as not any boat in the world. It means a boat that's within the sea, within the borders that we will talk about, within the waters that are within the land, the border of Israel. So yes, even if it's on a boat, it is considered part of Israel, whereas Rabbi Yehuda said only if the boat is touching the floor, then it's considered part of Israel. But if the boat is floating, then it is not considered part of Israel. Okay, and then now we're going to pick up on that machloket and relate it to another one regarding a perforated pot, which is in a way similar to a boat in that you have something growing, but it's not directly connected attached to the ground. If you have a pot that has a hole in the bottom, but it's held up on pegs on a tripod, and if something is growing in it, what is its status? Rabbi Zera says that would be the same as the machloket of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. Rabbanan say that just like a boat that's floating on the water, the soil on it is considered part of the ground, and so too a pot, even though it's floating, is, if it's in Israel, would have the laws of the land of Israel. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said no, if it's touching the floor, then that's fine. Yes, it's part of Israel. But if it's floating, like a boat is floating, not considered part of Israel, so too this pot is floating in the air, and there's air separating between them, and therefore it is not part of Israel, and it would be exempt from Ma'asrot and Shevi'it. So that was the opinion of Rabbi Zera, that the two scenarios are parallel. However, Amar Rava Dilma Lahi, Rava says not necessarily. Ad kan la kama Rabbi Yehuda hatam ela bisfina suya livroach, aval asisha no asui livroach alo. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda over there regarding a ship, he says a ship that's not touching the floor, that's not considered part of the ground because a ship keeps moving, and therefore you don't consider it part of the land. However, a pot that has a hole in it that is on a tripod is stationary. Unless someone moves it, doesn't move on its own, and therefore it's considered stationary, and it is part of the land. And so even the Rabbi Yehuda would agree that a pot on the tripod is considered part of the land of Israel if it's in Israel. And I could argue the other way around. Rabbanan only say that a boat floating on water within the maritime borders is considered part of the land of Israel because there is nothing separating between the ground and the boat except water. There's no air separating. So water can be a connection, right? You can consider the water like a solid earth, like it's a thick earth. So the water is an extension of the earth. It's all solid stuff. Not just air in between, and that's why it is considered part of Israel. But but in the plant that's floating, and there's air separating between the ground and the pot, the Rabbanan may very well say that it's not attached to the ground, and therefore does not have the laws of the land of Israel. And so Rava disagrees with Rabbi Zera. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar ben harot Eretz Yisrael dekol amala plige ela ki plige beyam hagadol. Now Rav Nachman is going back to those two opinions, those two baraitot, about whether a boat, so a get that's written on a boat and brought into Israel, is that considered part of Israel or not? Rav Nachman clarifies that everyone will agree that if it's talking about a boat that's in a river that's within the borders of Israel, right, many rivers all throughout within inland rivers, that certainly that would be considered part of the land of Israel, and you would not have to say the formula. Rather, the whole discussion is regarding Yam HaGadol, is regarding the Mediterranean Sea. The Tanya, Ezehu Aris ve'ezehu Chusala Aris. We have a Tosefta and Turumot, what is considered in the land of Israel and not in the land of Israel. Kol sheshofeya ve'yored miture Amnon ve'lifnim Eretz Yisrael. Miture Amnon ve'lachus Hosala Aris. So first, it defines a border up north. This Ture Amnon is a mountain range up here. So if it's outside the mountain range, then it's not part of Israel. If it's within the mountain range, then it is part of Israel. Okay, so that's for the mountain range. But now we want to know is regarding the Mediterranean Sea. What are the maritime borders? So Hanisim Shebayam, Nisim means islands. It's a word that comes from Greek, nesos, island. So the islands that are nearby in the Mediterranean Sea. So the first opinion says we make an imaginary line from that mountain range up here all the way to a river, this river in Egypt, and we take this imaginary line, and that's the maritime border. Any land that's inside of this border would be part of Israel, but anything outside is not part of Israel. That's the first opinion. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol shekeneged Eretz Yisrael, harehu keretz Yisrael, shene'emar ugvul yam, vaya lachem hayam hagadol, ugvul ze yeh lachem gevul yam. Rabbi Yehuda says anything that is parallel to it. In other words, he agrees you take this as the top point and that river in Egypt as the bottom point, but you don't draw a line, a vertical line between them. Rather, you draw horizontal lines all the way to the ocean, so that anything that's between the latitude of that mountain range and the latitude of that river of Egypt all the way through is going to be part of Israel, any island here, not something that's connected to a landmass, not Africa, not Spain, right? But everything else, which would be much more expansive than the first opinion. Now, והניסין שבסתדין, ראותן כאילו חוט מתוח עליהן מכפלוריה ועד ים האוקיינוס, ומנחל מצרים עד ים האוקיינוס, מן החוט לבפנים, ארץ ישראל מן החוט ולחוס, חוסה לארץ. And so now explaining the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, he learns it from this pasuk here because it says in Sefer Bemidbar that the western border, you shall have the Great Sea for a border, so Gvul Yam, that's the Mediterranean Sea, but then it repeats so there's a repetition of right Yam Gadol Gvul and then again Gvul Yam. So from this doubling, he says, oh, this is the border, and the border goes all the way out, and therefore any islands that are on the side, we make an imaginary line from that northern city all the way to the ocean, and from the southern border of the river of Egypt all the way to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean, and anything within that is part of Israel, and anything outside is not part of Israel. So now we ask, according to Rabbanan, what are they going to do with that extra word ugvul, since they're not extending it all the way out? And their answer is, no, we need that for the close by islands. If I didn't have that word gvul, I would think that it stops at the coast, at the land. I wouldn't know that it goes into the water at all. So I need the word givul to teach me that these close by islands are in fact connected. Whereas according to the Yehuda, he would say that those close by islands obviously are part of the border of Israel, so they don't need a pasuk to teach them. They're within the border in terms of any parts that's sticking out. We can make this line, so you don't need a pasuk for that. Rather, you need the pasuk to extend it all the way out in this direction. According to this understanding, we can now have a third resolution of those two Baraitot above, that the Baraitot were talking about a boat that's within this area, let's say far out from beyond this line, within this line, everyone would agree that's part of Israel. But beyond the line, that's where the machloket is. And the Braita that says that this is part of Israel, that it is part of Israel, and therefore you don't have to say the formula. That is Rabbi Yehuda, who says these are the maritime borders all the way out. So all this is part of Israel. Whereas the other Braita that says that the boat is not part of Israel, that's reflecting the opinion of a Rabbanan. And since it's all the way out here, so that's not part of Israel, and a get that comes from a boat out here the messenger would have to say, B'fanai nichtab u'b'fanai nichtam. All right. And so now we go back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir Omer, Akko ke'eres Yisrael. Akko is the northernmost border of Israel, and according to Rabbi Meir, Akko is within the land of Israel itself. So now a question, we're going to use our Mishnah to answer it. If someone sells his slave, a Eved Kena'ani, to someone in Syria, is it like selling them to someone outside the land of Israel or not? Well, what's the law? If I would have a slave and I would sell him to someone in Egypt, which is for sure outside the land of Israel, the law is an Eved Kena'ani has to follow mitzvot, the same as the mitzvot that a woman has to keep. And therefore, there's a mitzvah to live in Israel, and many mitzvot that depend on living in Israel. And therefore, a master has to make sure that his slave is fulfilling the mitzvot that every Kanani has to do. So a master cannot force the slave to work on Shabbat or anything like that. And if a master does, then he is overreaching his authority. So if a master sells his Eved Kanani to someone who lives in Egypt, then the slave goes free because the master is forcing him against the mitzvah of living in Israel. What an amazing halacha, very Zionist. So now the question is, what about Syria? Would it have the same law? If I have an Eved Kanani and I sell him to someone in Syria, is that considered outside the land of Israel and he goes free? Or is Syria considered, it's in between status? So for this law, is it considered part of Israel and therefore the sale is valid? Amar lehu tinitu Rabbi Meir Omer Akko ke'eres Yisrael Gittin in labadim la v'kol sheken l'sura d'merchakatu ba'az. So Rabbi Chia answered, we have it in our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says Akko is like Eretz Yisrael for a get. Right, for a get only. For a get it is, but for Abadim, the land of Akko is not. And all the more so, Syria, which is much farther north, right? Everyone would agree, the only machloket there was about Akko, is it in or out? Rabbi Meir says in for Gittin, but even in Bimei it would agree that Akko is out for the law of Avadim and certainly everything else. And therefore, Syria is outside the land of Israel. If someone would sell Eved Kanani to someone in Syria, everyone would agree the slave goes free because it's being forced to leave Israel. Tenor Rabbanan Bishlosha Derechim Shavta Surya La'aretz Yitleres Yisrael L'Shosha L'Chutza La'aretz. And so now that we mentioned the status of Syria, we bring a Braita that has 3 ways in which Syria is the same as Israel and 3 ways in which it is not. This is a mnemonic device, Ab Bar Rak. The ayin would be this one. Afarah tameh kechusa la'aris. The land of Syria is tameh like any land outside of Israel, has a dirabanan status of tum'ah, either because there are graves that are lost there or because of a spiritual impurity there. And so someone who wants to be tahor cannot go there. And what we just mentioned, someone sells his slave to someone in Syria, then it's like selling it to someone outside the land of Israel, and the slave goes free. And the context of Gittin, if someone brings a get that was written in Syria, and he's a messenger, it's like he's bringing outside the land of Israel, and he has to say, B'fanai nichtab u'b'fanai nichtam. B'shlosha Eretz Yisrael. But in 3 other ways, Syria is like Israel. Chayevet b'maaser b'shevi'it ke'eretz Yisrael. Things that grow in Syria, you have to give maaser, and you can't work the land during a Shevi'it, just like in Israel. If you want to go, if you're tahor and you want to go to Syria and remain tahor, that's okay. That seems to contradict one of the first three. The Gemara will ask about that. If you buy land in Syria, a field in Syria, it's like you're buying a piece of land right outside of Jerusalem. For what law is that relevant? An amazing law, another very pro-Zionist law. If someone buys land within Israel, and the only time they can buy it is on Shabbat, and you're buying it from a non-Jew, and if you don't buy it on Shabbat, then the deal may not go through. The halacha, as we'll see, is that you're allowed to violate Shabbat. We'll see on what level, in order to buy the land, because acquiring the land of Israel from making it having Jewish ownership is more important than even Shabbat, at least the Rabbanan Shabbat. And so that law is true within Israel. What about in Syria? What if I'm going to buy land in Syria? Does that override Shabbat as well? Over here it says, yes, it does. Now, so let's review these. So the three ways in which it is similar. So in Syria, the laws of Maaser and Shevi'it do apply, like in Israel. So this Baraita must be of the opinion that the conquering of an individual is an official conquering. Unlike Eretz Yisrael, which was conquered by Yehoshua and all the 12 tribes, that was an official national war. The land of Syria was conquered by David, with his own army. It didn't involve all of Israel. It was not an official national war. Even so, it was a kibush, even though it was a kibush yachid, nevertheless, it is considered an official kibush, and therefore it becomes part of Israel for the laws of Maaser and Shevi'it. If you go to Syria and you're tahor, that's okay, you remain tahor. Hold on, in the first set of three you said that the soil is tameh, like all the lands outside of Israel, so someone that goes there will be tameh. How could you say it's tahor? And the answer is, if you go to Syria inside a chest, a box, or a cabinet, right, and you remain inside and you're just carried during that time, in Syria, you'd remain tahor. That's what we meant here. You'd say it would be tahor. Whereas if you do that same thing in a different land, then you would be tameh. As we see, this is actually subject to a machloket. The Tanya, hanichnas esamim b'shida b'teva migdal. Rabbi metameh. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda metaher. So if someone goes into other lands, not Israel, not Syria, in a box, Rabbi says that would be tameh. Even though you're in the box, you're still tameh, because according to him, the tum'ah of Eretz Ha'amim is not only the land, but also extends into the air. Rabbi Yosef says, if you're in a box, doesn't matter where you are, you're always okay. But even Rabbi, who is machmir and says tameh, that's only in other lands where the rabbis made a gezerah not only on the land, but also on the airspace. But in Syria, they said only the land is tameh, but the airspace is okay. So you see, it has an in-between status between Israel and other lands. So buying land in Syria is like buying right outside Jerusalem. For what law? Marav Sheshat, Lamash Kotvin, Alav Ono, Vafilu Beshabbat. This teaches that one can write a deed if you're buying land from a non-Jew. To Jewish ownership, you can write the deed even on Shabbat to make sure that the deal goes through. If you're afraid that you will miss the opportunity if you wait till after Shabbat. So now we ask, b'Shabbat sakadatech, really? You can violate Shabbat mideoraita, writing a document? That's one of the 39 melachot. You can violate this serious law in order to buy land. Rava already solved a problem like this, and he said, you don't do it yourself, you ask a non-Jew to write it, which would make it from a deoraita to a derabanan, shvut. And so too here, and even though in general to ask a non-Jew to do something is still prohibited because shivut is still not resting on Shabbat, it's asur midrabanan. But in order to settle the land of Israel, the rabbis did not apply their gezerah, and therefore one can violate a drabanan for the sake of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Tenorabanan, Aebed shehebi gito, vechatu bo atzmecha unchasai kenuyin lecha. Now we get to the third topic of a slave who brings his get. It's also called a get. A get actually means any document can be called a get, and there's get nashim, and there's get avadim. So a Eved brings a get, a document of his emancipation. Now, generally, let's just say a simple case. The get says, right, I am free. My owner has freed me. The owner is writing it. I freed the slave, and so this is a proof. He brings it. He can say, "Befanai nichtav ubefanai nichtam," and then he's okay. Good. So that's ratification of the document. So we allow this leniency, the same leniency we have for a woman, so that she can get remarried and not have problems of aguna. We do the same leniency for slaves, so that they don't have to go and find witnesses and ratify it. They can go on with his life. For that reason, for that purpose, it's the same. However, in general, other types of contracts that are financial contracts, if someone brings a financial contract that says, look, he has to pay me money, then you have to ratify it with witnesses. Not enough to say it was befanai nichtav, befanai nichtam. Okay, so now we're going to combine these two into one. What if he has a get avadim, and it says in it, atzmecha, the owner says, yourself, the slave, and all of my property are transferred to you. Right? The owner really loves this slave, and he wants to free him and give him all of his property to take. So he brings us to a court. What's the law? Atzmo kana, nechasim lo kana. So the owner does acquire himself, meaning he goes free, but the property he does not get unless he comes and confirms the document and ratifies it, because the Eved part, yes, he can do that himself by saying the formula, but the financial part he cannot do without the ratification. All right, that's the Braita. Now we have a question. In the Braita, there's two statements. Atzmecha unchasai kinuyin lecha. So there we separate the two statements. Atzmecha, we go ahead without ratification. Nechasai, that you need ratification for. So we can separate the statements. But what if in the get it doesn't say atzmecha, it just says everything I own I give to you. Now, everything that the owner owns includes the slave. So if you let this go through, then it will include everything, the slave and all the property. But how does that work? So we're going to see a machloket about this. Abaye says, listen, it's all or nothing. It's because it's one statement, there's no way to separate it. Like you separated here, atzmecha unchasai, we could say, atzmecha, that is valid. Nechasai, hold on, that's not valid without ratification. But if there's only one statement, so it's all or nothing, and Abaye says, all, because we do believe him, he can self-ratify by saying the formula for his own body, and therefore the statement is valid, and once the statement is valid, so then he gets all the property as well, and he doesn't have to ratify it with ratify the signatures. That's Abaye's opinion. Amar le Rava, bishlama asmo likne mididahava get isha, ela nechasim la likne mididahava kiyum shtarot alma. But Rava says, no, even though it's only one statement, I can still separate the two applications of the statement, right? For himself, yes, that's the same as a get isha. He can say a formula for himself, and thereby he can get himself free. But for property, no, that's the same as any other legal document, financial document, where you have to ratify it. And so, yes, you can separate the one statement into two applications, and the application to himself will go through. He is free, but he doesn't get the property, the rest of the property, unless he ratifies it. So Rava disagrees with Abaye. Okay, now that's one version of the machloket, where Abaye says all or nothing, and in that case he says all. Rava says you can split the difference. But then Abaye changed his mind. Abaye remains with the assumption all or nothing, But now he says, you know what? Nothing, because he can't get the property without ratifying the document. Therefore, it's all or nothing, and therefore it's nothing. And even his own body he does not go free, right? Because it's all said in one statement. He has to ratify it in order to get the property, and therefore we say it's totally invalid unless he ratifies it, and then he'll get the property and himself. Whereas Amar le Rava again says you can split the difference. Bishlam nechasim lalikne mida dehava akiyum shtarot alma elasmo likne mida dehava aget isha. It's fine. I agree with you regarding the property. He does not get it because that's like ratification of general documents. He has to ratify before he can get the property. For himself, let him get his own freedom, just like with a get isha. Where she can testify about it herself, and that works, and so too the Eved can testify about himself, and it works. So even though it's one statement, we can split the difference of the ratification that is required, whereas for himself it's not required. Right. So for either way, either formula, whether it's in one statement like or two statements, if asmecha un chasai, either way we can split the difference, and he acquires himself, he goes free, but the property does not go free. We'll see tomorrow the continuation of this discussion, where Rava here, who says that you can split the difference, he's following the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that says Palginan Dibura, one is allowed to take a statement and cut it in half and say half we believe and half we don't believe, which is a wider discussion, as we will see. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.